All right. So, one of the things that we're going to really touch on today, the two things I want to touch on with respect to the comparison between Mario and Zelda, really comes down to it really comes down to just how people like solved problems from a very new perspective. So if you think about the context of the time, right? I don't remember the date. 1996, I think, something like that. 98 maybe. These games came out. 96 says it right there. The idea of solving a problem like this at the time, the biggest hurdle is how do we make 3D in a video game make sense? Right? Nobody knew how to do that. In some respects, it seems obvious, right? You have a 3D space, people move around in 3D space. But one thing that's very peculiar about the way humans think is we actually really think in 2 dimensions. Like, we can only really think in 2 dimensions at a time. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're trying to like drive somewhere, you don't think about altitude. It's 2-dimensional. And in fact, you can see this in video games a lot. Very commonly, you see people who play Skyrim like get stuck on that very first Golden Claw puzzle because the puzzle is look up and they just don't look up. Like that's a really common problem. People just not looking up. And the reason that it's such a common problem is very simple. People tend to think in 2 dimensions. So when you give them a side scroller, it's very straightforward. You can go up and you can go down, and people don't really have an issue thinking about those 2 things at the same time. But as soon as you add depth to that, the whole thing becomes very confusing. And not only that, but players now have to manage a new thing, the camera. And from a player perspective, nowadays, after we've had 30 years of this kind of gameplay being a thing, it seems almost stupid. It seems almost crazy to think that, like, the camera is like a difficult thing to manage. But for players at the time, of course, totally new thing. So Mario 64 and Zelda 64, Ocarina of Time, both have a very peculiar challenge. They have to teach you how to manage a camera and how to manage 3 dimensions. They need to teach that because nobody is going to know that. Like, the developers just understand the context of the game and they want to teach you how to do that. So, I'm going to play this for a little bit, and somebody stop me when they think they've spotted an important element of the game design with respect to teaching players who don't know how 3D works at all, how to work in 3D. Go. I wasn't telling. Go. Mario.
Hello.
Well, I don't want to start speaking immediately, but I remember you could play around with Mario's face in the title.
Oh,
I don't know
yeah.
if that's anything.
Is
He
it?
doesn't do it
What do you
here.
think? Do you think it's
It's
anything?
I mean, from a graphical show, it would be the equivalent of having a flashy ray tracing segment at the beginning of your game, like the opening to most AAA games now. That's basically what this is. I mean, this was crazy back then, right? This was absolutely bonkers.
Sure.
Hello.
Yeah. So, think about this from a developer's perspective, right? We can do this. We can have this face pop up. Somebody has to make this. Somebody has to, like, build this. Then they have to build... Well, this guy didn't do it at all. But then they have to build... It. In Mario 64, you can grab the face and, like, move it around.
Right.
They have to make the hand as well to do that.
So they had to make all that. Well, why did they make that?
Um,
I
you,
thought it was like
I,
maybe as a joke or something, just to like an Easter egg for players.
Well, it could be
I
that
thought it
also.
was.
Maybe help pass time when it's loading.
Yeah, that's probably could be that also. Sure.
I thought it was a hardware showcase for what the I mean, I think the N64 was more powerful than the PlayStation 1. So I think this was, like I said, the big crazy graphical showcase. I think that not saying that's its entire point, but I think it really was a wow moment for a lot of people playing the game at the time. I don't know if that's anything, but that's kind of what I think.
That's that could be part of it too. Possibly. This is somebody, I think, just messing with the start screen. Mess around. Mess with it. Yeah, mess with it. Look at that. So this is just like video. But we also have this.
Right. I guess maybe to show a player who's been working with only 2D sprites, and maybe the Super Nintendo pseudo 3D at most. Just kind of what they're working with. Like you said, a lot of people wouldn't know how a 3D would work. This is a pretty good tell, I think, of what you could expect from a 3D space in a video game.
Yeah, so if you just drop someone into the gameplay, it's going to be massively overwhelming and confusing.
Right.
Right. So we got to ease you in. So how do we ease you in? Well, we can show you that you're dealing with like 3-dimensional manipulable objects, get you thinking about them as like objects that are manipulable.
Right.
That's the first step. The first step. They start teaching you immediately, right? Like first start screen. Technically the game hasn't even started. But they teach you that in this screen here. And you can even see Mario's head like moves around, and you notice they very specifically make his head move around like up and down. Just like rotating.
Yeah.
Something a 2D can't do, right? Technically you can fake that with really like a ridiculously complicated sprite sheet, but this is just one model that's just moving around. So they're introducing you basic concept of like the 3D thing. It can rotate. Look, it can rotate. That's something that our things could never do before. Now they can rotate. Isn't that cool? But also, important to keep in mind. Second thing, how does this screen work?
Transition.
You have a cursor.
Yeah.
Why do you think they gave you a cursor instead of like select?
Maybe to just to I don't know if even they were thinking about it this hard, but it maybe subconsciously says you're in a wider open space. You could I mean there's not much to see, but you could technically explore the title screen or the file select more than just navigating with auto select or something.
Yeah, there's kind of this sense of like poke around and do stuff, as opposed to like here's the 4 things you can do, which is again a very sort of not really. This is not as big of a departure, but notice in the start screen and in the select a file screen, they just give you a cursor to poke around with stuff, right? This kind of freedom of movement.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just like easing you into this idea of manipulating a 3D
Freedom.
environment.
Of freedom, of going any direction you want.
Yeah.
Now watch this. This cutscene is very important. Now we've primed the player to be thinking about freedom of movement in the space that they're in already. And then this opening cutscene shows lots of freedom of movement, this time from the perspective of the Lakitu, who is holding a camera on a string.
Oh, what the hell is that? That's not Super Mario 64 Mario.
I'm sure this is a massively up-res version. This is clearly not the original.
Sorry. It's what? Sorry.
So, what's the importance of the cutscene, do you think? What do they show you?
3-dimensional like areas that you can walk to, stuff like that. Not just like flat ground or like 2D spaces and stuff like that.
Again, heavy on rotation, right? They're rotating around the castle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Heavy
one
on
thing.
rotation.
They're really showing the 3D space. Like, rotation is a big theme for them, right? Because they want you to... What's the thing that 3D can do that 2D can't do? I mean, there's a couple of things, but rotation is one of the big ones. So they're really focusing on rotation, right? Really showing off, like, you can go around things. And they can, like, spin. There's perspective that will change. What else? They introduce you to a new character.
Mario.
Well, both. Yeah,
Um,
both.
And
But
Mario.
first they introduce you to Lakitu, right? Before even Mario shows up.
Peach.
And Peach, yes. Peach is a static image, so
Yeah.
that part's a lot about just giving you context for the game, so that you know what, like, oh, what's my objective? Rescue Peach. It's Mario, so they don't care too much about that. I mean, they do, but they intentionally keep it very simple. Not irrelevant to the game, but I think in this case, Peach isn't terribly relevant to the teaching 3D thing, which is why I think they kept it very brief. Although they did have voice acting in it, which is definitely weird for the time. Anyway, the next thing they do is they introduce you to Lakitu. What did you notice about the character of Lakitu as they introduce him?
he has the camera on his fishing hook, and
He's
he
got it on a
goes
fishing
behind.
And I
He
noticed
goes
that his
behind
cloud is
Mario
a
at the end.
PNG. His cloud is a PNG, it looks like.
Yeah, it's flat. But back then, this was like seeing crazy. This was
Yeah,
nuts.
this was.
Oh my
Listen,
God.
I played this game on release. It was mind blowing to my like 8-year-old self or whatever. I was blown away. It was
Damn, huh?
very, very cool.
I played Mario Galaxy when I was like 5, and I thought that was the most hype thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah. So Lakitu shows up, and then we stop here. So, why do you think they did this? Why is the camera on a fishing pole with Lakitu?
Wants
Well,
to show you how 3D third person works.
Yeah. But how are they? Sure. Well, definitely. But how are they specifically, like, drill into that a little bit? How are they accomplishing that? What specifically are they doing that you think makes that work? And it does work. People at the time did figure out how to use 3D despite not really having any experience with it. So it does work.
What would it do? I think moving him around. One of the things I thought is in older sprite games, there wasn't really any area you couldn't explore. I think how he comes out and he spins around shows you maybe how open this game in particular is going to be. Placing the camera behind Mario, obviously center. I mean, it's Super Mario 64. I don't think anyone thought he wasn't going to be the main character, but it puts Mario in the center. It angles you towards the castle. It gives you a good goal. It doesn't just put you out in a field. I don't know what if I'm getting
That
everything
is
right
true.
here, but
Okay, so
I think
here's the thing. There's a lot you're saying that's probably right. For example, with the castle in the foreground that gives you a clear, immediate goal. That's great. That actually harkens back to what we were talking about on Monday with the D&D stuff, where players have like an immediate, there's like a clear thing that they can kind of sink their teeth into. Definitely important. Not terribly relevant to the camera thing. We got to stay pretty focused, because otherwise we'll hit like because games like this that are really good, have a lot of thought put into them, and they're very dense with like analytical goodness. We gotta stay focused on Lakitu here. That's probably true, but focus on Lakitu and imagine. So like I said at the start, if you think about analysis as being a tool for figuring out how to accomplish things that you don't know how to accomplish, if you were trying to do a 3D game and putting that in front of a bunch of players who had never played a 3D game before, what lessons would we learn from this? What new lessons would we learn from this? Well, we notice we have Lakitu starting. He's holding the camera on the string. Why do we do that? Because in modern games, for example, that's not really a thing, right? That you just have the camera. It's just sort of understood that there is a camera.
Right.
You move the right stick and the camera moves, and that's like, it's super normal now. But of course, at the time, it wasn't. So they made the camera a character, right? They made him a guy. They made the camera a guy that you move around. It's like much more intuitive to think about a guy that you move around. And if you think about, I have a guy here and a guy here, and the stick controls this guy.
I have a funny question. Who's the cameraman that was on Latitude?
Yeah. You know, those are the real questions.
Maybe
Another
that was
Lakitu.
Peach.
The real question.
Maybe that's why they had Peach. Yeah, so you have Lakitu come in, and he's got the camera on the string, right? So it introduces you to the idea of a camera, but also the camera is a character. So it's just easier to think about the character moving than it is to think about moving a camera. Moving a camera is very unintuitive to people. That doesn't make any sense. But moving a guy, I move Lakitu left, and that means that he moves left. So if Lakitu moves left, now he's here and Mario's here. So that's like different. And I can like, okay,
Right.
okay. And now all of the concepts of, because remember the whole theme up to this point, or one of the big themes up to this point has been rotation. Okay, we have really heavy emphasis on rotation. They're like putting the idea of rotation in your head, subconsciously. And then when we get here, you understand that, okay, the camera rotates around Mario. This is so fundamentally important for players to understand. They give you some time to mess with jump, because of course very standard like onboarding tutorialization thing. When you give a player the ability to, when you teach the player a new skill, give them the opportunity to use it immediately so they can play with it. And now here's Lakitu again. And Lakitu's gonna talk to you. Gonna say some stuff. And then here's you press your C stick to move the camera. And look at how much, like in a modern game, they would just have an icon of the control stick and have the word camera. That'll be it. Everyone would immediately.
Yeah.
Some games don't even bother to do that anymore.
Yeah, no.
But here they have to be like, okay, how do we explain this concept? So they have to go into it. And of course they're gonna do it in a, like in a thematically appropriate way, where it's themed as the Lakitus are like filming Mario. They're reporting on Mario's actions. So they have a camera. It's a character. The Lakitu is a whole character. And he's telling you, we're gonna film what you're doing. I'm
I'm a
the
seasoned cameraman. Yeah.
Yeah, you can change the angle by pressing the C buttons. To take a look at this.
I'm gonna be honest. If I was a kid, I would skip all the dialogue and I'd figure it out. But that's good to have the little. I don't know how many players read that.
A lot. The players will tend to read things when you're giving them information that they care about that they don't know. They have a much higher tolerance for reading things. So you have to look at the player perspective, right? Players did not know how cameras worked, so they would be
Right.
They would be concerned with how cameras worked. And this is souped up a little bit to have some narrative to it, to help it be a little bit more like, to help it flow a little bit better. And it is pretty short. It's like a sentence or two per box. And it's segmented, so it feels quite short. And of course, if you do skim it, you at least get this big, bold C camera thing.
Mhm.
So even if you're skimming, you'll see it. And then it has a whole system in here of how you can... you can look at the surroundings with C, press A to resume play, switch camera modes with the R button. There's like... Of course, they have signs to remind you of stuff, but that's all great. And now you can play. So, of course, this is all like 30 seconds of gameplay, right? If you're just playing it through, it's like 20 or 30 seconds. But it's very, very dense with how it primes you for the lesson. And then when it gives you the information, you kind of have the context to understand what they're telling you. So if they didn't have any of that and they just gave you the text, then you have text that as soon as you start reading it, doesn't make any sense to you. You don't really care. And it's much more likely that you skip it. But because they primed you for it and they put you in this scenario, they even gave you a little bit of an opportunity to move around first. Makes things a lot easier. A lot easier to digest. It's like much more immediately... It's much more immediately clear that this is important and how you're supposed to use this information. This person obviously already knows how to play this game.
Speedrunner.
No, he
It's
wasn't
4
doing
hours
the
long,
crazy.
so I don't think.
Oh, no.
I don't think
No,
so.
you can tell. You can tell
No,
it's
no.
not speedrunning as of
Yeah.
right here. Do you see that right there? It's not speedrunning.
Yeah.
Speedrunner would immediately turn around and start back hopping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh shit! And would also immediately would jump across here, and
Yeah.
there's like a million shortcuts right here already.
He's playing efficiently, but he's not speedrunning.
He's just.
And I
going,
knew
he's
from the
just having a
start
good
he
time.
wasn't speed running because he would have been way faster to that portal instantly.
He's not using any
Okay.
speedrun movement tech.
Anyway, it's just walkthrough right there. So.
So that's kind of the basics of how they teach Mario, and what we're not gonna do. Let's see. I'm gonna try to find a Zelda video here, but we're not gonna do the tutorials in the Zelda game because they do have tutorials, obviously. We're just gonna talk about the difference in the camera and how they use the camera.
I do remember the Zelda one's cameras being a bit different than Mario's, that's for sure.
That's totally different. Let's see if I can find a decent example in this 12-hour video. Maybe this was the wrong choice.
That's definitely the right choice.
This'll do. There you go. One second. We'll get to it in a second. Let's go.
You muted.
You muted once again.
There we go. So, this is obviously a bit more of an intense fight, but obviously the thing about, you know what, I'm not gonna say anything. You tell me. How it's different
The
than Mario.
camera has there's a lock on. That's one thing. And if I remember correctly, there's like aiming and stuff like that for cameras.
Just look at what we got here. What do we got right here? Just start small. What's this? What's going on here?
It's a lock on.
Why?
To help with combat.
You can track your opponent even when they're moving around.
Why do we care about that?
Make it easier to find them.
Because it's a quality of life feature. A lot of
Oh,
modern
Mario
games
doesn't-
have that.
Mario doesn't have that feature.
Mario's not a combat game though. Mario's a
Why does that
platformer.
matter?
Because being able to jump on the Goomba is moving. If Mario locked onto the Goomba, you wouldn't be platforming. You'd just be pressing a button. It would take away any skill. This locking onto an enemy, there's other things you're doing. If it was just an aiming mission, they probably wouldn't have a lock on target if all you were doing was aiming. But you're dodging and finding opportunities, right? I don't know. Maybe there is aiming a target mission that has lock on in this game. I haven't played this game. I haven't played any game.
I don't think there's lock on to targets. You actually have to aim and shoot your bow.
Right.
If you have
Yeah.
a bow here, he just pulls it out. You don't go into bow aiming mode. He just shoots at the target.
Oh.
But if we're talking about like actual like bullseye targets, I don't think you lock onto them.
Yeah, like in the world,
Well,
like in
there are
Tears
two.
of the Kingdom when you.
There are two aiming mechanics. There's a first-person manual aiming system and a lock-on system.
Okay. I thought is the lock-on system just for enemies though?
It's a lot of strafing right there.
It's not just for enemies, but the game does determine what you can and can't lock onto.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of what I thought.
Do we want to? Here's the thing: when you're doing analysis like gameplay analysis like this, remember if you're making a game, you would have to, if you were designing this system and you were trying to implement this system, you would have to obviously create an enemy. You would have to have a main character. Obviously, you have to have a player character. Then you'd have to do something like you'd have to figure out, okay, there's a button that locks you onto the enemy. So the player presses the button. What happens? What happens? Like, what's the logic of that? You'd have to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, how does this work?
It makes your character face from.
Yeah, let's actually let's slow this down and see if we can get just that lock-on moment. Where, okay. Come on.
Because all I know is
Oh,
it points
my
the camera
goodness.
towards it instantly.
Okay. Okay, what happens now?
Your camera arrows come from the side of the screen.
It's not locked
It
onto it.
it, it, uh,
Yeah,
it
there's a little
rotates you to.
animation.
It rotates. It rotates the entire camera to where the enemy is.
Yeah. It I guess it would kind of show you you're in a battlefield, or that you're allowed to use the entire space to fight the guy and not just sit in a corner, use your shield, and because I think what someone like my mom would do is when the camera spins you around, is you'd probably think it's almost more similar to a quick time event and not a battle or something.
What's this stuff
Where
going on here? What's right here? What's this?
I don't know what
Little
that
fairy?
is.
Is that the
I'm-
ferry?
Yeah,
That's
your
the
little
fairy.
fairy guy goes yellow and goes to the thing.
Is that how lock on this in this game works? Is it's what like
You-
in universe it's the fairy?
You have this little fairy companion. Y'all gotta play some classic games. Ocarina of Time is a very it's one of those games that's like so much basically all lock-on mechanics in all games originated here.
I heard this was the first lock on, yeah,
It's
or one of the first.
it's a pretty important innovation, and the way that they did it, similar to the Locky 2, they have like a character to like make it sort of thematically obvious what's going on. So what happens is the your fairy Navi goes to a character and turns yellow, and it's like a thing that you can lock onto, the fairy goes to first and tells you can lock onto it. Then when you press the lock on button, it locks on to that target. So that's a really important like feedback thing, so that you never press the button, you're like locked onto some random nonsense you had no idea about. But it's also something this game can get away with because it's simple. So like the game design very explicitly does not put very many lock-on targets at screen at any given time, because that would be obnoxious in this context. So they make it very simple. The fairy goes, you can lock onto this. You press the button, and then the camera immediately, very quickly, centers that thing on the screen.
Right.
And there's a little bit of give, because if there wasn't any give, then any time, so this is actually kind of an important thing with camera controls. if there wasn't any leeway for the character not being perfectly on screen, the camera would just like constantly like make tiny, really awkward little micro adjustments. It'd be really obnoxious. It'd be very, very annoying. There's a little bit of give, and then the camera like smooths into putting it in the center of the screen. So you can see that's why the camera has a little bit of a lag time behind the thing moving. It also helps give the thing a little bit more weight.
If you were to go back for a few seconds, it just looks like he was like moonwalking, like Michael Jackson there.
Well, yeah, 0.25 speed is gonna have some weirdness. Now, what this allows is things like this. Look, you attack her, and then she's guarded, right? And the feedback for the gameplay situation that you're in comes from what she's doing, which is only possible because we've locked onto her, right? If we didn't have this lock-on system, having animations like this kind of convey what you can and can't do, or what you should or shouldn't do, does not work at all, because we can't trust that you're able to see it. And if we can't trust that you're able to see the gameplay feedback we're giving you, we can't trust that you're getting that information. And if you don't have the information, how can you possibly play the video game? So there's a need for this lock-on system for that reason. Right? The important information is there and is always there. If you're in combat, we know, as the designers, because we can make this true, as the designers, we know that this right here is where all of the important information is. All of it, right here. To some degree here, but you're not really worried about that, because hopefully once you've learned how block and attack works at this point, at some point you come to just trust that those are just happening, so you don't really pay a lot of attention to the feedback on your character, although it's still important to have animations and stuff for various reasons. But the really important thing is to understand that this character needs to be on screen at all times, and that's why the camera is constantly trying to center her. We need to make sure she's centered, because that's where all the gameplay feedback is. So, very, very important to have a lock-on system. And one thing I want to point out is think about inventing a lock-on system without the context of video games having lock-on systems, right? Think about the first team to like think about that as a solution, and what kind of thought process you would have to go through in order to understand that this is a reasonable solution, or that this is a good solution. You have to understand the importance of the gameplay feedback of this character, right? You have to understand that is crucial. And then you have to communicate that so that other people can design like enemies around that on a team. And then you have to come up with a way. Okay, what if this character was just always in the center of the screen? Well, how would we make that work? How do we make that make sense to players? Well, we need feedback to show them that something is being focused on. So how do we focus on it in a way that makes intuitive sense to players? So we have this big yellow indicator that contrasts everything else. It is the same as the yellow of the fairy that tells you this is the target that you're locked onto, that helps draw the connection between the target you can lock onto versus the target versus targets that you are locked onto. So there's a visual distinction between can lock onto and are locked onto. Of course, the game will, at some point in the beginning, taught you how to do that. And before it teaches you this lock-on system, you have kind of a free camera. So it teaches you the free camera separately. You walk around for a while, get used to the free camera, then it teaches you this lock-on system. So now it gives you, right? So you get used to one, then learn the second one so that nothing is super overwhelming. But it's also very important to use this, and people learn how to use this. It's very, like, it's a very cool thing that people figured this out. To me, that's very, very interesting that somebody, like, figured this out.
Notice this video is also longer than Mario one by a lot.
Well,
So
I
this
mean, I
game
think
was
it's just the
probably
nature
bigger.
of the YouTube. I don't think either of these is a full playthrough. It's just the nature of the YouTube videos I found. I don't know. So this harkens back to what we were talking about on Monday with like understanding what the gameplay decisions that the player's making are and how they make those decisions, right? So in this case, it's something like, well, this enemy is gonna block. This enemy can block. So in order to hit her, she'll block and dodge. So in order to hit her, you have to wait for her to attack you, and then respond. Like there's kind of a specific thing that you're supposed to do. That's actually quite simplistic, and it's why you can see a huge amount of evolution in third-person combat over the years. One of the evolutions that you'll see in third-person melee combat games is in something like Zelda, you'll fight an enemy, and the way you fight the enemy is like, oh, you gotta like wait for her to attack and find your openings. And how do you find your openings? Well, she'll attack you, and you gotta like block. Here's the hit. Oh yeah, okay. So there's like a window after she stops blocking that you have to attack her. So you have to like time your attacks. That's kind of the gameplay. There's a very simple. It's pretty simple. I mean, it's effective because this isn't like the only enemy in the game, so it's fine. But obviously, combat in a game like this has evolved significantly to be where enemies have much more dynamic interactions much more often, instead of this like, oh, here's like the thing that you do. But early on, making it so that there's like a thing that you do to fight the enemy, and then you have tools to maybe bypass that, like arrows and bombs, and different enemies will respond differently to different tools, which is important for other reasons. But in terms of the camera, what we're looking at is the camera is always highlighting this character. The reason the camera has to always highlight this character is because the way that you fight this character is you have to watch for her block, which you know she's doing because of the animation she's doing. And if that is the thing that tells you when the opening to attack is, then she needs to be front and center. So you have a camera lock that makes her always front and center so that you can look at what she's doing, understand what she's doing, so that that reads clearly and quickly in the intensity of a combat encounter. And that way everything can be made visually very clear without having to do a bunch of external nonsense or, God, imagine Ocarina of Time without a lock-on system. It's just not, it just doesn't quite work. There's just not enough fidelity in everything, in the movement of everything, and players are just not prepared enough to handle that. You know, like in Elden Ring, you can do a lot of stuff without lock-on. There's actually times when it's recommended to not use lock-on in a lot of situations. But one of the reasons that works so well, there's two main reasons that works so well. One, there's a lot more fidelity in the movement. There's a lot more care in how the rotations happen and when the rotations happen on the animations and so forth. But also, people are just used to it now. People are just so much more used to melee combat and third-person cameras that we can push things a lot further because we don't have to worry nearly as much about making the camera angle make sense. But at the time, the camera angle was like the most important thing because nothing makes sense if you don't see what's happening. You need things to make sense. And since everything is going to be visual, the camera becomes like the most important element of that. So understanding how the camera works is still vitally important in any game. But with respect to these older games, it's really interesting to look at how they solve these problems without any precedent. They didn't have any games to look at and go, well, this is how cameras work in all these other 3D games. Those didn't exist, so they had to figure it out. And when you're thinking about game design from your perspective, from when you're making something, first of all, you don't have to be reinventing the wheel with everything. You probably shouldn't be, but in terms of process and approach, conceptually, to game design, you want to be thinking about how it is that people were able to solve these problems. Like, what was their way of looking at things, and what were the questions they were asking to try and solve those problems? And a lot of it, most of it, if not all of it, comes down to very much the things that we've been talking about a bunch already. Really identifying what the player decision points are. Really identifying what needs to be communicated to make those decision points make sense and the feedback that those would have. And then understanding how we can convey those in a way that feels to players to be very intuitive. Because one of the things that's important to remember about intuition, about player intuition, is that player intuition isn't real. you create it. You make things intuitive for players. Player intuition isn't something that players simply have and you find and they go, well, this would be intuitive. We're going to make this design because it's more intuitive. No, you have to answer the question of how you make the design intuitive to players. You have to like implement the intuition. You have to like put it in their heads. It's the same thing as the magic trick analogy. It's the same thing. In Magic, there's what are those guys called? There's the ones that do the manipulation where they like predict a thing that you said, or the mind reader type magicians, if you're familiar with that at all. Mentalists or whatever they call themselves, I don't remember. But a lot of that is just like subtle suggestion. They use a lot of sort of subconscious suggestion to make you think a certain way or about certain things. And then when they do the reveal, what's really been happening is they've been leading you to say the thing that they already wrote down, right? Because obviously they're not actually reading your mind. Game design works very much, intuitive game design works in very much the same way. Just like with Mario, how we're talking about like, okay, we want to put the idea of rotation in the player's head. We're just constantly going to give them these different examples of rotation in 3D space. And then when we teach you how to use the camera, that idea of rotation in 3D space has already been like in your head for a bit. So as you start interacting with the camera, it becomes much more intuitive to just like very natural to just like move the camera around a little bit. Simple. So you make it intuitive rather than it being intuitive, because 3D cameras at the time were extremely unintuitive. So designers had to figure out a way to make it feel like it wasn't unintuitive. Very, very complex, very interesting. It's a very difficult thing to do.
I don't think did the Nintendo 64 come before the PlayStation 1?
They were, I don't know exactly their release dates, but they were competing consoles, so they came out around the same time.
Right. Because I guess we can Google that. I don't know. But if they're reinventing
1994 is when the PS4 came out. PS1.
1994,
1994, yeah.
when was N64? 1996.
Why does it
N64
matter?
is 1996.
Well, is Nintendo inventing? They didn't invent the 3D camera then, but I don't know how good were PlayStation 1 games when it came to their camera. I don't know. I know, was it just basically 2D?
That detail is
But
irrelevant because somebody had to figure this out for the first time.
I guess so. I guess that.
But also, I imagine if you think about the life cycle of development in a game, there were probably multiple people trying to figure this out for the first time at the same time, and they
Right.
Somebody had to figure this stuff out. Nintendo they were definitely doing this without precedent, because they were developing Mario. Plus PS1 did also have a lot of, PS1 had a lot of like Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, that kind of era of games. There's a lot of 2D there. Or like faux 3D where they have the layering, but it's still two-dimensional, like a plane that you're moving along.
Yeah.
But somebody had to figure it out. And this is how. I'm sure they were figuring it out pretty much for the first time, even if technically some games released before them. Mostly because just games didn't exist at the time. You also have to consider that these were like launch titles for the Nintendo 64, so they would have had to have figured out what these games were going to be and have a good concept and probably prototypes while the Nintendo 64 is in development, because you're not going to develop a console and go, well, we have a console, let's figure out what to do with it. You have a whole ecosystem. So regardless of whether or not they were technically first, they were definitely figuring it out from scratch, and they're the most famous examples for good reason. I think there's something to be said for the fact that you can't think of any PlayStation 1 games that really handled 3D really well.
Right.
At least not early on. You have like the Sonic Adventure games that came out, but that was more like Dreamcast era, and also didn't handle 3D that well.
Dreamcast. Was Dreamcast the last Sony console?
No, Dreamcast was Sega. That was back when they were making.
No, right.
consoles.
Was it the last? Was it the last Sega console? Was it the last Sega console?
Might have been the last Sega console that they made. Yeah, they might have stopped making. No, they did the Sega Saturn. Was that before Dreamcast? Or after? I don't remember.
Yeah, it looks like it was.
All I know is Sonic 3D was not that big when it first came out.
They barely Sega. Sorry for the sidetrack. Sega barely made it to 2000. They discontinued
their
the Dream.
consoles stopped. Yeah.
They discontinued the Dreamcast in 2001. Yikes! That's
Yeah,
the worst thing that happened in 2001.
They just shifted. They just shifted to making games.
Yeah, I just think everybody thought Nintendo would do that when the Wii U came out. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's just an example of like how okay, the things to kind of take away from this is one, again, sort of appreciation of how people had to figure this out and what that might mean for you when you have to figure out new stuff, because you do have the benefit of being able to use reference. And that's the big difference between you and people making these games for the first time, is that if you get stuck, you can use reference and take things from other games. But understanding exactly what you're trying to accomplish is how you will take things from other games referentially and implement them in your game successfully, because you need to understand what works together. Just like if you took the camera systems from Zelda and Mario and just swapped them, suddenly both of those games don't work very well. It's very awkward. So even though they're both good systems, what makes them good systems is that there's an understanding of what those systems need to accomplish. So whenever I talk about structural design or designing things, understanding how a design fits structurally into a larger whole, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm referring to this idea that in Ocarina of Time, this camera design makes sense structurally in this game. Meaning, there are things that you need to see on the things that you're locked onto that you need to track in real time. So we need those things to be front and center. And so in order to do that, we need this lock-on system that makes sure that those things are front and center. Whereas in Mario, there's a lot more like pick things up and throw them, and it's like not that precise. There are some parts in Mario that are actually kind of annoying because there isn't more precision in the camera. But they're few and far between. For the most part, they do a pretty good job. Those are the biggest things to take away from this, is like understanding structural design. Also, I think it is valuable to appreciate these older games just because it's like these were things people had to figure all this stuff out for the first time. And now we have so much benefit of just like, there's like 100 new games per day released on Steam now. And a lot of them are decent. A lot of them are terrible, but a lot of them are decent. And there's a lot and there's, decades of games to draw from and steal from. But understanding what you're trying to steal is very, very important. And you should be stealing, but what you really want, the crucial skill there is understanding this is how this thing fits structurally into what I'm trying to accomplish. And if you're trying to make a third-person action game, you like Zelda or like Dark Souls or whatever, you need clarity on what your enemies are doing, because that's where a lot of your gameplay feedback comes from. With Mario, gameplay feedback doesn't come super heavily from enemies. It does in the occasional boss fight or whatever, but it's mostly just jumping around. So the gameplay feedback comes from being able to understand the platforms spatially and where things are. Another big thing that you'll notice that isn't here, or it is here, but it's much more subtle. Look at the shadows. There's like no shadow.
No, well, is that because it would be a bad game thing, or is it because the N64 couldn't handle it?
Well, they don't need
shadows.
Look at Mario. Mario is a big dark shadow.
Right.
Why?
I heard Mario has a shadow that goes straight down below him, no matter what the lighting is so you can know what you're going to land on.
Yeah, see, it lets you understand your relationship to physical space at all. What are you doing? What are you doing to me? Swear to God. There's an example. That. Yeah, so because the platforms are flat planes that you need to jump on, you need to understand where you're landing. Because Mario has fidelity of control in the air. When you jump, you can still control the character in the air, right? So you need to understand where you are relative to what's beneath you. Whereas without that shadow, it's like suddenly it's let's see if we can just get a little tiny thing. Get a little, that's good enough. Okay, come on now. Let's just cover up that window. Cover up that shadow. It's actually a lot less clear where he is in 3D space. Like immediately way less clear. That little shadow is pulling putting in a lot of work. That's pulling its weight. And also it's not a dynamic shadow, right? So that helps cut down on performance cost, which is a huge problem in these games. These older games had to really, really conserve their memory and be very efficient. But that's why you probably don't see a shadow here, because man, there's just stuff on screen that you don't need. This is not important. You have a lock on camera. That's showing everything you need. So we don't really care. There's probably shadows. You can probably find examples of shadows in the game. Like there's a little bit there.
Right below his feet.
Yeah, there's a little bit to just like ground the characters in the space so they don't look like they're floating, but they're not. There's clearly not a lot of effort put in to like make sure that they're, well, you have to make sure that you know where you are in physical space at all times, even when you're 10 feet in the air. Doesn't matter, because Link's never 10 feet in the air. It makes no difference.
Mm-hmm.
A little shadow at his feet just to ground you so it doesn't look like you're floating. That's important, but you don't have to worry too much about it. Whereas Mario's is like, look at that. That's like it's almost like a pure black dot. Not quite, but almost. I don't think it even has transparency. Okay. Yeah, okay. I know.
No, I've noticed the shadow even appears the same on water or something.
Yeah, the shadow is okay. The shadow is literally just a PNG. Just like a gray PNG. It might not even be a PNG. It might even be like a bitmap file or a JPEG file. Because they don't need transparency. It doesn't matter that you can like see through the shadow at all. They just need this little gray thing that reads vaguely like a shadow so that it doesn't look totally out of place, but then tells you where you are in physical space at all times. It's like the simplest thing possible. But it's incredible how much that little gray dot does for this game. And look, when you jump and you're in the air, it's like smaller. Little detail that helps you understand that you're like up. It doesn't dynamically change based on how high you are. It just shrinks so that there's like, it's just a dual state. Are you in the air or not? There's all these little tiny details that make it, again, if you're playing Mario 64, it feels intuitive. It feels very intuitive. And the reason it feels intuitive is because all of these little things that you don't want to be thinking about consciously are dealt with for you by the designers. The designers know that they're important, and they made sure that you would understand them without having to think about them. It's very difficult to pull that off. It's actually pretty hard to do. It's very impressive every time anybody does it well. It's a really difficult, very complicated thing to do. Because those things have to be very simple. Right? If they're super complicated, if it's super complicated nonsense, then people have to think about them and they're not intuitive anymore. But if they don't convey the information they need to convey, then also it's not intuitive anymore because the players are just lacking information that they need. So you need these very simple, very, very precise things. You need to know like exactly what you're communicating to the player. What is the shadow communicating to the player?
The shadow's communicating you're high up, where your position is, where you're going to land if you were to fall like a rock. In like you said, I think it shrinks. It's not dynamic. It just checks how high you are from the closest ground, and then shrinks or gets higher.
It's two pieces of information, right? It tells you, are you jumping? Are you in the air currently? And where are you vertically in space relative to the nearest surface, essentially? Which It's a platformer, so of course that's important information. But it's so much harder. Like, it's so much harder to see that and go, oh yeah, well, that's what it's doing. Or it's so much harder to actually like identify that that's a need in a game than it is to go, oh, that's a cool thing that they did, right? So you need to, analysis is useful to get used to thinking about things in these highly detailed ways, but also in these very precise, very practical ways. This is why you might be starting to see why I am not a big fan of like most YouTube analysis videos, because they don't deal in things like this, right? They don't tend, I mean, there's obviously good stuff out there, but there's also a lot of terrible stuff out there. But they often deal in like high-minded rhetorical nonsense. I heard one time, if everybody's heard of the Game Maker, I think it was a Game Maker's Toolkit video that talked about 2 types of randomness. And it's nonsense. Like, it's just nonsense. It makes no sense at all. I don't know how anyone would ever apply that concept as a designer from the perspective of like, I don't know what to make and I'm making a thing now. And I need to figure out what to communicate to the player. It's much more complicated, but it is important to kind of go through these exercises to understand like, okay, games are doing a lot and it's very precise, and the best games often have these very simple methods of communicating things that you don't think about. And the reason you don't think about them is because the game is designed for you to not think about them. That's what intuitive design is. But if you want to become a designer and then make games that feel like that to other players, you have to suddenly become very aware of all of those pieces, because you need to actually make them and understand how to make them and understand what exactly the information the player needs is. That's the trick.
Right. So I don't know what to. Do we have any other examples, or because I don't know. I think I'm just talking to talk. I guess I don't know. I forgot what I was gonna say.
Yeah, we're gonna take a short break here in a minute, like 5 minutes. I like to do that about halfway through. 3 hours is a lot to just sit there for, so we're take a quick break, and then what I'm gonna do is either I'm gonna open something and do a little bit of a run through, and shut up, and I can play something for a little bit and just kind of talk through how a thing works. Or somebody else can play something and stream it, and we'll tell you to pause it and talk through how the thing works. One of those. And we're just going to go through some concepts. We're just going to kind of go through how it works. The process of analysis. Just going to continue to exemplify that. One of the big things through all of this is I really want you to be thinking about like how detailed you can get in your analyses and how detailed the game design gets. In fact, that makes me think that let's do this. Let's do a quick thing. This would be we won't spend a lot of time on this. I have an exercise that I like to do where everybody designs a loot box mechanic. And I like it for a lot of reasons. One, it usually is the kind of thing that people don't specifically go into making games thinking, boy, I can't wait to design loot boxes, and getting you into a headspace of just like designing things that you're not necessarily super passionate about designing is very helpful to understand like the technical process of figuring out how the design should work. But also, it's a surprisingly complicated thing to design, and usually I do this in a long-form thing where it's a documentation-based thing. We might still do that in project ideation at some point, but let's do like a quick version of that right now, where I just ask the question: your goal is to design a loot box mechanic. Where would you start?
Well, where am I thinking? Am I a billionaire CEO who doesn't care, or am I an indie game that just wants a little bit of funding?
Irrelevant. You need to design a loot box system. In fact, so there's an economy design thing that we could put in here where you have to figure out like you'd have to figure out how to create a 20% hard currency to soft currency conversion profit in the loot box, which is an economy design challenge. But the ethics of this are irrelevant. It's just a matter of, like, you have to do a loot box mechanic. You're a designer on a game. You're told that you need to make a loot box system. And your starting point as a designer often is just a Google document. You just have a Google doc. You just got to write out what the design is. You're essentially writing a technical document, but it's the design for a loot box. How would you start?
Okay. I'm gonna go full Ubisoft on this one, or EA. I'm gonna make 3 loot boxes. One of them is a free daily loot box that can be opened with
You only need one loot
once every
box.
24 hours. What?
You only need one.
Oh, well, this okay.
Because we're just
New
designing a
idea.
system. We're not building out a whole thing. We're just designing the system for, like, how do you make a loot box?
I would make a
A
loot
loot
box
box.
with loot box with in-game currency. I don't think you should pay real money for a loot box because that doesn't sound as appealing as currency. I would I think I would display the probabilities of each item. Maybe not exactly, but maybe each item will be color coded, kind of the way Fortnite does it with rarity. The rarest item in the box would say it's rare, but it wouldn't say you have a 0.5% chance to pull this thing.
Okay.
I think it'd kind of be the way. I don't know. I think it'd be
How
kind
does the
of
loot box
the way
work?
a loot box. You pay currency and you get either one or a few random items from any
Where?
given loot pool.
How do you do that?
What would it'd be in some tab? Let's again for Fortnite, for example. It has the, let's say they add the loot box of Fortnite. That there's the
So there's a tab.
um
Where's the tab?
I it would be where. Okay, let's assume, let's add it to Fortnite. Fortnite has the play, shop, career, battle pass stuff at the top, and you control it using the bumpers to switch your tab. We're gonna put it right next. It's not gonna be the thing you open on, but let's say it's the very next tab over from the ready up screen. So if you
Okay.
need to go to your shop or your
I kind of want to do a short version of this. I don't want to get too deep into it. So
yeah, I don't
does
know
anybody
how.
have any interjections here about how they might approach this? I just kind of want to get this quick because we'll probably do this full exercise later. But
Make just like a page for it, and then have like a box or like a chest or whatever you want to put it as, and then just
no,
make it shape.
not whatever you want to put it as. Who is designing this?
Who is?
You are.
All right, let
Alright.
me show you this. This is a loot box system I designed once upon a time.
Okay.
This is the document.
Oh wow. Yeah, how long did you?
Holy-
That's like a fully laid out thing. Like that's more than
Yes,
I could do. And
it's a full design. This is so this is the point of this exercise. In this case, the point of this exercise was just to get you talking about it so that I could give you this example, give you the contrast of, like, there's actually a great deal of detail that you need to be aware of as a designer because you design it, right? You don't get to say, like, oh, it's in a menu somewhere. Where? What menu? What does it look like? In my case, it looks like this, and like this, and like this. These are the different states of the menu and what each thing in each of these menus does. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, as a designer, you design the whole thing. So understanding, like, to a degree of specificity, the loot box system allows players to purchase boxes and a chance to obtain one of 8 unique items. How many items? 8. Each is a different item. There's no overlap. Each loot box has a flat cost in hard currency, and each drops 1 item. Okay, that's something you have to figure out. How many things does each loot box drop? What happens when they receive duplicate items? What's the functionality of the loot box? Well, it's an item the player can receive, right? So that means that it goes into the player's usual inventory system. So this refers to another inventory system. If this was, and this once upon a time, this linked to another Google Doc, that's was the inventory system. So if you were confused at how the inventory system of the game worked, you would click on this, it would open feature brief that goes, oh, here's how the inventory system works, which is its own whole thing in great detail. So, but this was able to reference that because it existed. I was like, okay, usual inventory system. And then they're obtained via purchase through the game store page, which also had a link. Players can only open loot boxes via a special screen. So that's important because they have these loot boxes in inventory. What do they do with them? Well, nothing. Until they go to this other screen. When open, each loot box is removed from player's loot box count and yields a single item. The list of possible items along with their individual odds are listed below. The loot box works in the following ways. One purchase always yields one loot box. Players can collect as many loot boxes as they want before opening them. There's no limit to how many you can hold in your inventory. Players, which technically means the limit is if it's like a float, technically there is a limit, but it's obscene. It's like 2.4 billion or some nonsense.
Right.
There's technically a back-end limit, but it doesn't matter. Just because it technically can't be infinite. Players open loot boxes one at a time or in bulk. Open one versus open all. So, for instance, there is no choose how many loot boxes to open option. It's just these two. Each loot box yields a single item. The results are displayed in an expandable scrollable list. Players receive either a unique item or a number of 20-sided dice, accompanied by a small amount of fanfare, which is bigger based on the value of the item received. So there's just an overview here of just like there's going to be some feedback for this thing. Here's an alternative, because this loot box system uses this 20-sided dice system rather than giving you soft currency for duplicates. Players can stockpile dice or roll them immediately as long as they have at least 20 on their inventories. In other cases, they receive soft currency immediately when they roll the dice. When rolling dice, player can only roll dice in increments of 20. Just every little thing. Do you see what I'm saying? Like every tiny detail you need to understand. All of it.
Right.
As a game designer, your job is to go through this and have a reason for all the details. So at some point, I don't remember who it was, but at some point somebody said, like, I don't know if they actually thought this through. They probably did. They probably thought it through. Like there's somebody who sat down in something like this and figured it out. Access points. Okay, here's like all the ways that you can access the loot box menu. Compensation. Here's how the dice rolling system works. Because I made reference to the dice system, but I can't just say you get dice. Right? I have to define what that means and how you use them and where you use them and what the interface looks like. And in fact, I do. And here's just as an example of what the economy looks like. I determined that 144 was the correct hard currency cost because of the... We won't get into economy design until term 3. So you know what? Let's just skip this. But then I talk about the UI UX because I'm like, okay, the player has to interact with the loot box, right? So where are the calls to action? What feedback elements are there? How does the main menu look? Well, it looks like this and has these elements. How do those elements work? Well, you have these 6 buttons. Buy opens the buy box pop-up. Inventory opens the inventory pop-up. These all open new pop-ups. This closes the menu. Clicking on the dice table also opens the roll dice pop-up. So there's a redundant use case here. There's background art, which is desaturated to avoid drawing attention. It includes a dice table with dice on it, which you can see in the little layout. What happens when you press the buy box button? It looks like this. What happens when you press the open box button? It looks like this. What happens when you open the reward screen? It looks like this. What happens when you get the inventory pop? It looks like this. What happens when you do the roll pop? It looks like this. What happens when you direct redemption pop up? It looks like this. So I like just clearly defined everything, and then with each thing, I said, here's what that actually means in practice, down to the all of the details need to be figured out. And then I have telemetry indicators of success. So the idea is just as a designer, it's very important to be very detail oriented, but also to make sure that those details that you're thinking about are specifically relevant to what you're making. That's really important. The difference between thinking and overthinking isn't really about quantity. I think overthinking is a bit of a misnomer. The difference between thinking and overthinking is just making sure that what you're thinking about and what you're writing down is in service to a design. Am I actually fleshing out the design, or am I working with irrelevant details that don't matter? Understanding the difference is a difficult thing that kind of comes with practice, but making sure that you're being very detail oriented all the time is very important. Don't let yourself get away with vague statements like, you open a menu. What menu? How? When? Like, oh, you open a menu. How? Is it tied to a button? Do you assign a menu to a button? Oh, select opens this menu. Or is it a sub menu in another menu? Or is it a thing in game you have to walk up to and click on? You have to like use the interact button at the station and then it opens a menu. Those are all different things, right? Design-wise, those are all totally different. Like,
Or like COD, where it's like a menu behind a menu behind a menu.
Well, yeah, that's part of it too, because in a very complex game where you have a lot of things going on, you have to prioritize. You have to figure out what things are front and center and what things are buried behind submenus. It can be valuable to bury things behind submenus, because if you're burying things behind submenus, it's harder for players to find them. That doesn't make it worse. It just means that the things that you don't want the players messing too much with or worrying much about should be buried more deeply. You can put them behind submenus, because that way it's less of an issue for the players to worry about. They're just not going to worry about them as much. But this kind of level of detail is important. And remember, this is also goes back to the idea of intentionality. It goes back to the idea of what you're trying to accomplish and why. When you're doing analysis, gameplay analysis, having a focus and sticking with that focus and figuring out how the game accomplishes that thing is super important. Because the game is doing all kinds of stuff at all times. But understanding what you're focusing on so that you can extract the useful information and becoming very aware of like all the details, but also developing the skill of understanding how to sort of automatically filter out the details that are more or less relevant makes it so that you can do this you can get to the point where you're doing this in a very efficient way, such that you kind of notice it as you play even. You sort of end up in two minds where you're sort of playing it as a player, but then there's also a part of you that's sort of observing yourself playing it. And it's this very weird like externality of like, oh, I feel this way when this thing happened. That's interesting. Make a note of that. I wonder why that thing made me feel that way. Probably something about the game, especially if it's common among a lot of players. So analysis is sort of the practice or the exercise of like really digging really deeply into the details of why a thing is a certain way, so that we can get used to dealing in finer details, always in relationship to higher level goals. Very important. Because if you're not in relationship to higher level goals, you're just doing random analysis for no reason. And if you're not being detail oriented, then chances are you're not being like deep enough to understand how things actually work. You really can't let yourself get away with like vague statements. And learning to catch yourself when you make vague statements is very important. Don't let yourself get away with that. In fact, you should not let each other get away with that. Be each other's feedback for that. Every time somebody says something vague and you think there's... But that's actually a great exercise. It's actually a great thing to keep in mind in general. Listen to what people are saying. And if you think it's being too vague, take a second and think about like, okay, if you think it's too vague, in what way should it be more specific? What information is it missing? Right? Instead of just saying, well, it's too vague, what information specifically do you think it's missing? That's going to be the kind of thing that, like, just getting in the habit of thinking in that way is going to be huge. It's going to be a huge difference. One thing you'll notice about designers who are, like, really consummate professional designers and people who are more, like, amateur designers, one of the big differences you'll see is that some people just think in this way, like, automatically all the time. And it's a really, if you want to be a really good game designer, you kind of want to be in that headspace just kind of automatically at all times. There's a story.
Right.
I'll tell you this story about what I take sort of exemplify this real quick, and then we'll take a break. There was one time I was gonna have company for a bit. I was gonna have company, but it all came like very suddenly. There's a few people coming over, but it all happened very, very quickly. And I didn't have a lot of time to like clean up, so I tidied up a bit. But I knew I wanted to create kind of I didn't have time to like really do a deep clean up. I had like less than an hour, so I tidied up a bit, just made things like look decent. But also I just in service of, okay, I know there's no like it's not like my place was disgusting or anything. It was fine. It's not like it was a health hazard. So good. The baseline like practical problem is not a problem. There's no health issues. So what matters at this point is only the experience of a clean place. Because if you know how it is, if you go to somebody else's place and it looks kind of gross, like it's off-putting, right? So we want to avoid that. So how do we make it feel welcomingly clean without being able to spend the time to really thoroughly clean everything? Well, you have to prioritize. So I prioritized light switches, door handles, and basically any other thing that I knew people would interact with. Because humans do this very interesting thing. If you're going to interact with something, you look at it first. It's a very natural human thing to do. So anything
Yeah, you don't want
that's
to touch the
interactable.
spider.
So anything that was interactable, like a light switch or a door handle, I made sure looked really just totally spotless. So all my light switches and door handles were spotless. And like everything else was fine. Like anything else that people were going to interact with, I made sure to clean. Because what that does is it makes it so that, because what are people going to, their experience is based exclusively on their experience, their perception. So the things that people are going to perceive, I cleaned, I polished, they looked great. And that resulted in a bunch of compliments about how everything was so tidy and clean, because it was fine. Because people they only know what they interact with, what they think about. So they look at the thing because they're going to interact with it, and now that's the thing that sort of characterizes their experience. It was a very like game designer thing to think. because it was very rooted in how are people going to experience the environment. Not at all what is the environment. The question wasn't what is the environment. It was how are people going to experience the environment, which is a different question. It's a totally different question. There's some overlap there. There is some overlap in how things actually are versus how they're experienced, of course. But it's a totally different question. You'll come to totally different answers. And that's the way you want to be thinking about game design generally. And if you're doing gameplay analysis, that's the headspace you want to be in. Like everything, right? It's all that way. The whole thing. Okay, let's take like 5 minutes. We'll come back. I'll either play something or somebody else will play something. It would be kind of nice if somebody else played something. That would probably be better.
I will.
Sure. Get ready to pause a lot. We're going to do a lot of pausing and talking because we want to take like a small moment and then dig deeply into what's going on. So it's not going to be very fun. It's not really going to be like, yay, playing a video game fun. It's going to be study, work, analysis.
Yeah, that's fine.
So let's take a quick break. 5 minutes. Definitely difficult. These are not easy things to be able to do, but you know.
Right.
You ever play any instruments?
No.
Unfortunately, that would have been a perfect
I used to
analogy.
play the drums. That was about it.
Well, when you first started, it was just like drums are particularly like that. When you first started, like everything happens at once, and you have to really get into the ability to like separate all your stuff. Yeah, that's tough. The first few times you played drums, man, you just can't understand how anyone can possibly do all this like stuff where everything is moving separately.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, over time, you get there.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Right. That's how. I guess that's how everything is.
Yep.
So it should
pretty
be.
much. Pretty much.
I think there's genres of things people are naturally good at, but no one is just born good at an instrument.
Well, there's definitely talent. Talent is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
So you want us to play a game that we haven't played before, or?
Ideally, yeah, that'd be better.
Okay.
Best.
Okay, so DeltaRune time.
Have you
Okay.
started it up yet?
I'll start it up right now.
I played DeltaRune. I liked it a lot.
Can I? Oh, it's arrow keys. Okay. Want me to share my screen here?
Yeah, we definitely need to see what's going on.
It won't let me put it full screen with the.
Probably can do windowed full screen. I presume you can do windowed full screen.
I gotta turn it down real quick. It's so loud. There we go.
Would an indie game be the right? I mean, Undertale, no. Deltarune is probably one of the better indie games ever made, but it is an indie game, so it wouldn't have the full industry thing behind it. Oh, that looks weird.
What do you mean
I guess it
industry
looks
thing?
different. Like there wouldn't be a bunch of minds behind Undertale. It's just Toby Fox and probably close family. I mean, you might have a few artists that could share their ideas, but um, if something is off, would anybody be able to call them out? I guess not.
Well, what do you mean? Why would that?
Well, I guess
Why
at the
would
end of
that
the day, it's
matter?
his game, it's his choice. But let's say there's something that I know we had a whole debate about objective versus subjective, but for the purpose, let's say there's an objective flaw. If it's just an indie studio, you're not really gonna have a lot of voices or cooks in the kitchen to I mean that's people we'll tie it back to another thing. People say the reason the Star Wars prequels weren't very good is because everybody attributes every Star Wars film pre-Disney to George Lucas and him alone. But there were a lot of people who worked on the script and everything for the first three movies, but for the next trilogy, it was just him. So there wasn't really anybody to call him out, and therefore it was a really good movie to him, but it was a pretty unenjoyable experience to anyone
Well,
else.
that comes down to what, again, this is why intent is so important in what we're doing. If you think about the intent of what we're doing in analysis, the intent is not to make judgments about things, right? That's why we don't care about good or bad. Our intent is to look at things and go, this element accomplishes this thing. I can use
Right.
that. So that means that we no longer care about making any kind of value judgment about the people making it. In fact, we don't even care about their intent because we only have to look at what the game accomplishes. And we can do that in various ways. For example, you can, if you have an experience, if you remember the example I did with, oh, I don't know if I gave this example actually, but in one, so here's a Dark Souls example for you. When you're playing Dark Souls, you know what? Hang on.
Yeah.
Hang on. There's stuff happening. Stop playing the game for a second. In Dark Souls, there's this thing that happens where people will like play Dark Souls and then they'll die and then they'll have their souls that they have to go pick up. And they're like, oh, I'm gonna go get them. But then they die again before picking up the souls. And what happens sometimes is they'll do this thing where they go, well, I don't have to worry about that anymore. At least.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the exact kind of thing I'm talking about, where I can look at people, I had that experience, and then I thought, I wonder if other people have that experience. And then I can look around and see that seems to be a relatively common thing. That's happening to a lot of people. I wonder why that's such a consistent experience. Because if it's consistent, probably it's something the game is doing that causes people to have that experience, right?
Right.
So now I can go, all right, here is why I think people are having that experience. I can make a statement about that. Then I can go kind of test to see if that's true in this very scientific methodology of like, I'll make a prediction and see if that holds true. And you can kind of try to disprove that hypothesis. That's how objectivity in design works, is going through that kind of process. I don't care about whether or not they intended for that to be the case. I don't care if it makes it good or bad or who's responsible. None of that matters to me. What matters to me is why the game creates that experience, because then I learn something valuable for me that has practical utility as a game designer. Like, oh, I could probably make use of that somewhere at some point.
Okay.
That's why that's valuable. That's why the analysis is valuable. It has nothing to do with, like, that's why I don't care if it's a solo developer, because the game does things and then it has results in the gameplay experience. Whether it's, 500 person team or AI made it, like, it doesn't matter. Okay.
AI. I hate AI. It's so lame.
The way that I want this to happen is you're going to play the game, and anytime somebody says pause, just stop. If you have to pause,
All right.
pause. But just immediately stop. And whoever says pause, presumably it's because you have something you want to say. So I want you to talk. I want all of you to talk a lot. Talking a lot is better than talking not enough, because you need to be saying things. And if you say a lot of wrong things, that's fine, because if it takes 100 wrong things to get to a good thing, then you need to say 101 things. And if you say 0 things, you'll never get there. But
Right.
there's a twist here. I want, when somebody says stop and says a thing, I want everybody to respond to that. And here's how I want you to respond to it. I want you to respond to it in 2 ways. When somebody says a thing, I want you to do what's come to be known in philosophy circles as steel manning the position. If you're familiar with straw man arguments, this is the opposite. Basically, it means taking the thing somebody said and then reinventing it in your head as the strongest, most valid, best version of that statement from that person's perspective. So this is not changing the idea. It's bolstering and strengthening the idea. It's basically taking the idea and asking yourself, why is that a really good idea? And then actually answering the question. And I want you to do that. And the second thing I want you to do is to look at the argument and go, why does that statement not make sense? Why is it wrong? Both things. I want you to really, really come up with why it's right and also why it's wrong. Both things. Does that make sense?
Straw man and steel man. We'll
Well, you
do
don't want a
both.
straw man. You don't want to straw man the argument. Because a straw man means taking the argument and then like misrepresenting it to make it weaker. You don't want to misrepresent the argument. You just want to go, this is why that argument doesn't work. I just want you to argue for and against anytime anybody makes any statement, makes any commentary, an analytical commentary. I want everybody to try and argue for and against that position and have good arguments in both ways. This is not only an exercise in analysis, it's also an exercise in perspective and understanding how you could make that work or not, or why it wouldn't work. Both things. It's a very difficult thing to do conceptually, but it's a very valuable thing.
Right. Okay.
And
all right.
Before we start, and I'm mostly going to not talk. I just want to make a point about this selection screen because, again, similar to Mario, these early screens tend to be overlooked by people, but good designers extract value in every little part that they possibly can. So right now, they did things like...
Have you played DeltaRune?
Nope.
Okay, well, all right then.
So what this suggests to me, from the perspective of someone who hasn't played it, is you're making these decisions, right? You've made decisions like favorite food and blood type. So from a designer perspective, what I'm thinking is these decisions have to come up again at some point, probably. Now, that doesn't even necessarily have to be in some significant mechanical way, but they're going to at some point give you feedback for these decisions in some capacity. And what that capacity is might unfold more as we go, but they have to give you feedback for these decisions. And again, they don't have to make it so that these decisions actually factor in significantly into the gameplay mechanics. They just have to make it feel like significant decisions. That's it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm mostly going to not talk. Yeah, play the game. Anytime somebody says pause, go.
All right.
There's no sound, by the way. I don't. Is that a me problem?
I think it's just
Might
very
be.
low.
Yeah, I'm getting sound.
Oh, it's a me problem then. I'll figure it out.
I love that. You create a character just for it to be discarded.
I guess that opening scene would only mean anything if you played Undertale because those are all the people you interacted with in that one. I think they kind of expect you to play that one first. I don't know.
So this is like a sequel.
It's It's not a sequel. It's like spoilers, I guess. I don't know if anybody cares that much.
Go
In
ahead.
Undertale, there's a war against people and monsters, and this one, the war never happened.
I see.
No, this is after they got back to the surface. Actually,
I don't think it is.
it is. It is.
Hold on. No. Wait a sec.
You're done with the wrong.
Wait a second. No, it isn't. I don't think so because they don't acknowledge the war. Like, there's no Frisk, and I don't know. Like, if Steam would open,
Well-
that'd be awesome.
Does it matter?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't matter. It's just no, it doesn't. Not to this.
How would we approach
Depends
this
how
as
much-
a designer? What are we thinking? Or think about it from a player perspective.
Shows off the vibe. I think it shows off the vibe really well of the town you're in. So eventually, when and I think it'll be a good contrast when stuff hits the fan. It'll be a big shift because if everything was miserable before and then the bad guy shows up, who cares? So I think this is a very good tone setter. That's
But what if-
that's my theory.
What if you're a player who hasn't played, not RuneScape?
Undertale?
What am I saying? Undertale. And what if you are a player who has played Undertale? How would that change your experience with this situation?
If you played Undertale I imagine the game has so many different endings that nobody's experience is the same. But I imagine if you played Undertale, it would be just crazy to see all these characters who were miserable, trapped in the underground, now on the surface just with normal homes. And if you haven't played Undertale, then I guess you just think it's the normal world, but people are deer and dinosaurs sometimes. Might show I don't know, a lot. The sprites have a lot of personality, but I don't think that most of them don't come up again.
Yeah, never played Undertale.
Yeah, and I'm at the Steam page right now. Dive into a parallel story to Undertale. It's not a sequel. I knew it. I don't think DeltaRune is a sequel.
That's Spare World, okay.
Yeah, DeltaRune is not a direct sequel to Undertale, rather is set in a parallel universe. Yeah. I guess the dialogue ties into, or it affects something in the future. Again, no spoilers, but when that deer girl asks if Susie and her can go to the supply closet, that does come back later. It comes back in like chapter 2 or something. It's a very well thought out game. So, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking for from a design perspective, but from a writing perspective, um, it's a very well thought out, meaningful game. I think even from chapter 1, chapter 7 was fully planned out. I don't think anything is left up to chance in this game.
Well, that's how
And
all writing works, really.
right, but yeah, obviously. But I think a lot of people, I'll tie it back to a game I always played. I think the FNAF guys have been kind of making it up as they go, or at least they were for the first like 5 years, because nothing makes sense anymore. I think they kind of writ themselves into a corner.
Well,
So,
but that comes with lots of sequels versus one game.
right, obviously. But if you
the thing to be, if you, so it's not that story is irrelevant, but we don't want to worry too much about this, about the writing of it. Writing is his whole own can of worms.
Mhm.
So the way to contextualize this is something like, okay, we have, well, the way to contextualize it is through gameplay experience. What is it like to experience this as a person, conceptually, emotionally, intellectually? What is it like to be dealing with this? What are the elements of the game? Like, sometimes you can just start simple. What are the elements of the game? There's some walking around and talking to people, and that's the gameplay so far.
Yeah, it encourages interacting with a lot of different objects. You know that if you beeline it straight to the next whatever is the clear objective, you're probably gonna miss a lot of important stuff. This game has hundreds of NPCs, so it does right from the start. It encourages interacting with most.
Is that
Sorry.
okay? Somebody do the thing. Make an argument for and against. There's a statement.
My statement was I think this game encourages exploration. That's my statement. I think this game encourages you to interact with NPCs.
don't think he's entirely wrong, but I think it's more like just story based stuff like that. Though you don't have to interact with every NPC, in my opinion.
That's true.
No.
The statement was
I
the game
think-
encourages exploration. First, argue against it.
Uh,
Take the position the game does not encourage exploration. How would you do that?
You'd almost have to play the game. I don't think anyone except has anyone played the game from
It doesn't
the
matter.
start
We're
to
looking,
doesn't
we're
matter. I
looking
think
at
we're
what
looking at
we've seen so
perspective.
far.
Yeah.
So far, I have not been able to explore. It's just been leading me in one place to another.
Just
Very
maybe following around,
linear.
having to do one
Very
thing and stuff.
linear.
Yeah, very linear. So
This is a good. There's a reason this is useful is because it's really important to learn how to get out of your own perspective and look at it from another perspective. So in this case, the difference in perspective is I've played the game versus I haven't played the game. Right? So you need to be thinking about it. Well, it's a little bit difficult to think about it from the perspective of someone who's already played the game because you don't know what that entails. But if you have played the game, you can look at it from the perspective of people who haven't. Because at one point, you were somebody who hadn't played the game. You experienced it for the first time at one point. So you have to like go back to that and think about like, okay, what's it like for someone who hasn't played the game? And what's it like to experience up to this point? Is the statement, the game encourages exploration, true given what's happened so far? Has the game up to now encouraged exploration?
No.
right now, no, it has not.
Do you see that different? The shift. That's the shift in perspective, right? Just actually,
Right.
I guess based on that. And those are the kinds of things you need to get good at doing. Like how do you see it from a different perspective? Like again,
Right.
this is why the exercise is argue for and against. We want to have at least one argument for and one argument against most things if we can, because the whole point is to sort of get out of this headspace of being right or wrong necessarily. The part of that exercise is about detaching the statements you make about design from ego. The best teams work when people just discuss how to make the product better and solve problems collectively rather than and ego just like isn't involved. It's just like, okay, here's how we can make this better, and not attaching ourselves to our idea, going, oh no, I feel bad because you criticized my idea. Who cares? If the objective is to make the idea as good as possible, then as soon as the idea is out there, it's separate from you. It's a separate thing. This is why and what we want is to collectively have the best information, the most accurate information, the best perspective. And that's tricky because there is no absolute like correct thing. So we have to come up with the way that we want to approach it and think about it in a particular way. Ask certain questions. Be specific too. In this case, what would exploration mean, right? Like, well, if you were, let me not say this. Let me ask instead, what if we did the other thing, or the other half of this? Somebody take the statement the game encourages exploration and make the strongest argument to that effect that you can.
With the information we have right now.
With the information we have right now. In this case, it probably makes sense for someone else to do it, because the people who haven't played it, to try and like go look at what we have right now, and up to this point, how can we do that? How can we make that argument?
Right.
Can we make that argument?
I think if it was more so, if you're going with the argument that it's technically encouraging exploration afterwards, it's more so giving a hint that there's going to be exploration later because of what was asked of Susie and the reindeer girl. I think that is a reindeer, a deer, whatever. Is that a deer?
Yeah, Noelle.
Noelle, yeah. To go and receive chalk for the teacher, which probably would lead to the main character to have to go and find them at some point to go figure out what's going on.
Okay. there's
So in a sense, you'd be exploring, you'd be trying
We've
to find them,
essentially
so
been
you're
told
exploring around
that-
the area.
yeah, we've essentially been told that things we're getting a quest, right?
Mhm.
Anything? Is there any other
That's the best I
approach
could
that anyone
say.
else could take here?
Sorry. What? Any other? I think
And
I didn't
any
hear
other
that.
argument in favor of this statement?
Being given the freedom, I think it encourages, like I said, talking to everybody, because right now you're encouraged to find a partner, and they expect you to. I mean, you could get not unlucky, but you could talk to the NPC that continues the story immediately. But they also place that at the farthest, at the far top left, and everybody else in the room is just NPCs for the sake of world building. And I think they expect you to probably talk to them first, so it might encourage. I think this room encourages talking to NPCs. I think this is the first section that shows the player that it's probably going to be a good idea, or at least you might get interesting flavor text talking to anyone you can find. That's my game
So
theory.
it's basically like interacting with things.
Okay, so let's harken this
Mhm.
back to Monday. What's the
Okay.
gameplay here with respect to what the actual player decisions are, or core decision is?
The core decisions are again, I don't want to spoil anything, but this is a pretty scripted segment. There are not really any player decisions right now. So right now, I'd say there are very little player decisions. Obviously, you can choose who to talk to.
Your decision is really
worried
just
about-
like
but we're-
following what you're
But
having to
we're
do.
not worried about what the code dictates. We're worried about how the player experiences it, right?
Okay.
So in code, there's one thing that progresses,
Yes.
but we don't care about that. We care about because that's going to be true of all video games. There's always going to be like a thing that progresses. It's always binary. It's code, but
Right.
But the player, based on the player's knowledge, they have to make a decision. They have an objective, and they have a set of information. Their objective is essentially find a partner for the assignment.
Right.
Right. And they have a set of knowledge, which is it's going to be somebody in the class, but they don't know who. Right?
Mm-hmm. So
the experience is I need to figure out who my partner is. How do you do that?
Talk to the NPCs.
Okay, and in this case,
go
it's
around.
sort of trial and error. You talk to people until you find somebody who will be your partner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So
And
that's
yeah,
it. That's
I
the
see what you
gameplay
mean.
decision. That's the experience.
I see what you mean, separating any story or scripted event from how you experience it, because in the progress bar of the game, you don't find a partner. You get assigned one specific partner every time, but yeah, it would be trial and error until you progress the story in some way. That's kind of the gameplay mechanic in this room.
And if you want it to feel a bit unfocused, a bit meandering almost, you just don't give the player any concrete methods for achieving that objective. It's just do trial and error. But it's not a terribly, if there were 100 students, that would be like massively daunting and really obnoxious. But there's, what is there, 6, 7? So
7.
So you just go through a few. The dialogue is not that particularly long. And after you talk to 3 or something, things happen, right?
Yeah.
So if we were going to try to so now we have to ask the question. The initial statement was that it encourages exploration, but we're looking at it from explicitly this perspective. Would we call that exploration? Does it, with respect to how it feels, does it feel like exploration? Even in a small way?
Not really, no.
Really.
No.
Not
I'd
really
say
to me.
yeah.
Well, that's because I'm given something to do, not like exploration. In my opinion, is like you get to do your own stuff, but this one was giving me a quest to do something.
That's true. Yeah.
I think it is exploration. You got it very small, not open world, but
we probably need to be more specific with respect to what we mean by exploration, but we're not going to do some crazy nonsense semantic thing because that's a mess. Let's just use examples. If you think that the game isn't exploration, give us an example of what could be changed or added to this gameplay segment that would make it feel like exploration, even in a very small way, right? Keep the scale small, but make it feel like exploration. How would you do that?
To make it feel like more like exploration for me would be if I can leave the classroom, go to a different classroom, stuff like that.
Why is leaving the
Just
classroom
explore the
exploration?
school.
Why is that specifically the thing that makes it exploration, whereas this is not?
Because I get to like see like if there's any other NPCs I need to talk to, stuff like that.
Could you make this feel like exploration without letting the player leave the room?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah, technically, it would just be more so depending on where you place the classmates as well.
How would you make
I
it?
f-
How
Like
would
where
you
you
do
place
that?
classmates.
I feel like as long as you're able to interact with the inside the classroom, I feel like that counts as exploration. Because like as long as you're able to interact with it, for example, those papers or something like that. Uh,
What do you mean by
the
interact
pro-
with the
plot.
papers? What do you mean by that?
I feel like if you could just move over there
You just
and
go
like
up there, interact button,
and
and then it gives you
interact with
like a
it,
little. There's some papers on the desk, and
y-
like that's that
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah. I feel like that counts as an exploration. You know, it gives you the
Okay. Would everyone agree that that would be like a small scale bit of exploration, or does anybody think that that still isn't exploration?
I am like
Definitely
80% sure that
small.
actually is a thing. But
Because
anyways,
I don't
what?
care. We're just looking. We're just
Right, right,
taking
right, right,
that
right, right, right.
concept,
I
and
think.
we're
Well, one of the things. Sorry, it's hard to tell this talk. You could do, even if it's ultimately pointless and doesn't change anything, maybe little dialogue trees with some of the useless NPCs. It could feel like you're exploring. That you're finding a path that could
well.
work, even if it.
Hold on. We had a specific thing, right? The idea of having some interactable objects throughout the room, like the papers, little
Okay.
dialogue when you click on the papers, maybe the mouse or the monitor. The NPCs could be included in that because that's whatever, right? That's just a matter of whether you use paper sprite or an NPC sprite, because all it is walking up, pressing a button, and getting dialogue, right?
Right.
Mhm.
So functionally, they're the same thing. But would that example of click on the papers, get a little bit of about the papers on the desk, does that further this idea of making it feel a little bit more like exploration?
I think so.
Okay,
yeah.
why?
Slightly.
Why?
It. Uh. Because obviously not everybody will encounter or interact with those papers. I think it makes you feel like you discovered something, no matter how pointless or useless it ends up being. Because
So
it'll
the
never.
game, you're very close, but put it in context of player objective, right? Because the player objective is clearly established in this scene, right?
Right.
Mhm.
So what's the player objective, and how does this further exploration with respect to the player objective? This is a little bit of a trick question, but not really.
I guess how would it? It wouldn't further the player objective. It would just be more world building, which is important, but it wouldn't.
I feel like it doesn't
I don't.
progress as long as it
It
doesn't
doesn't
progress.
progress anything.
Yeah.
So it doesn't progress anything, but think about it. Think about it in terms of the decisions the player is making, right? I am told, find a partner.
Mhm.
And then I go click on the papers. What decision did I make in that instance? Or maybe
To
more
not find a
accurately,
partner.
yeah, what decision did I not make, right? I took the objective and went, nah, I'm going to do this instead. And then the game rewarded me for that.
Right.
If in this case, right? If you get a little bit of dialogue for the paper, I'm getting a little bit. The game is communicating like, yeah. Don't you? Yeah, you can kind of ignore the objective a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it feel exploratory. Why does it make it feel exploratory? Because the game is telling me go do this thing, and then I say no, I'm gonna go do this other thing, and then I get rewarded for it, which makes it feel like the game is perfectly fine with me doing that, or even wants me to do it. And I get stuff for doing it, right? So exploration, even something as broad and seemingly abstract and emotional as exploration, as the feeling of exploration, comes down to one player decision.
I see.
Right? And if you were designing a sequence like this and you wanted things to be exploratory, what would you do? You would add a bunch of things that are irrelevant to the objective given, that then reward the player for doing that. And you can do that in all kinds of ways, right? You can reward them with a little dialogue prompt.
Easter eggs.
Yeah, a little dialogue prompt that gives you, world building, for example, could be one of the things that feels good to kind of get a little bit more of. And it could be as broad as it unlocks a secret area that increases your playtime by like 11 hours. It could be anything. It could be anything. It could be anything. But the important thing is that gets rewarded, and how much it gets rewarded modulates how much players will want to explore. For example, if it's always just a little sentence of dialogue, and I, as a player, for example, let's say I'm a player who doesn't care about world building or story that much, and every single piece of I'm not going to go to the objective, I'm going to go to this thing instead, rewards me with world building. Well, eventually I just kind of stop doing it, right? So you want to vary the rewards so that different people, different players get like different.
Yeah, maybe if you
rewarded for
maybe if you search a trash can, you get an item or something.
Right. Yeah. So things like that are what make exploration. So we're going to continue, but first I want to do a little recap, because I want to make sure that makes sense with respect to sort of the process that we took there. We started really broad, right? Makes you feel exploring. It encourages exploration. Then we made arguments against it. And at that point, when we made the arguments against it, it felt like the whole thing had pretty much been solved, right? Like, oh, I guess it's not exploration. Or kind of resigned to like it's not exploration. But then if we dig a little deeper and we start thinking about what the player decisions are, and we think about what we mean by exploration and what would feel like exploration or not feel like exploration, and tweak the scene, the gameplay here to be more, we now have a bit of a lever, right? We can kind of make it more exploratory or less exploratory based on what we just sort of worked out, right? We could have a whole bunch of stuff with big rewards, or we could have one or two things with very minor rewards. And depending on how much exploration we want players to do later, we can expand that later, constrict it in certain sections, expand it in certain sections. Suddenly we have this thing that we can modulate, and it feels very actionable, right? Because it's like, oh, we need to like give players things that they can do that are not at all what their objective is, that they feel good for doing, and that's what's going to feel like exploration. So the more of that we do and the bigger the rewards are, the more players will run around and do the exploration stuff. And also there's another thing that we can do where we make like the space less constricted, a little bit more vague. So if you're thinking about like a open world game, for example, they have these big open spaces and it's not clear where you can go necessarily even. It's just a big open space, but there is like an objective still. So exploration now includes this thought of like, oh, I'm going to see what's over here. And if they get rewarded for that, that's more exploration. So we have these, we broke these things down. We took this grand idea of exploration, very, very emotive, very unapproachable from a practical design standpoint. But then we worked it down until we were like, oh, well, we just add things that the players can do that they get rewarded for doing, like outside of the main objective. That's kind of all we really mean. So once we broke it down, now we don't even have to really worry about the word exploration anymore, right? Because it could mean a different thing in a different context if we broke that down in a different way. But we broke it down in this way. So this is what we mean by exploration. So now we can modulate that part of the game to be more exploratory or less exploratory. So we made it very concrete, right? We took this very abstract thing and we slowly made it very concrete through this process. To the point that as designers, we could go, oh, well, we can just like modulate that relatively easily. It's actually kind of straightforward now.
Right. Okay.
It's still hard to make it like feel good and understand where the rewards should be. That's a whole thing. But we understand what exploration means, right?
In this game, yeah.
Yes.
Right. We've defined exploration. So remember at the top, I said we're not going to do a whole semantic thing where we define exploration. Instead, we talked about player experience and player decisions. And as a result of contextualizing the idea of exploration and using what would feel exploratory to us as a guideline in doing that, we still defined exploration for our purposes, but in a very practical way. We can actually use that definition actionably, right? As designers, we would know how to do exploration now. Whereas if we hadn't done any of that, and I said, make a game that has a bunch of exploration, you would have guessed, like, oh, maybe we make a big space where it's not clear where to go, and then players would have been lost and not known what to do, and it would have felt kind of like nothing, right? Like, it's very easy to have that kind of thing happen. But with these clear definitions, now we know, oh, what's exploration? Well, we have to give the player an objective. Then we have to give them something to kind of poke at as a way to almost rebel against the objective in some small way. And that's fine. And that creates the greater sense of agency because I'm telling you to do a thing. If I'm the developer, I'm telling you to do this thing. And you go, no, I'm going to do this thing. And then you get rewarded for that. You feel like you're kind of defying me. And it feels like it enhances the sense of agency, right? Even though obviously as a developer, I intended for that to happen.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It harkens back to the kinds of things we were talking about on Monday with the D&D stuff. But now we're applying it in a video game context. But it's the same principle.
Okay.
Let's see.
Okay, let's continue and put that aside, and we can think about exploration as it expands. See how they play with it.
Yeah, there it is.
I had to go test it.
And that's how you play a game like a designer. Oh, do they let us do that? Okay, they do actually. That's interesting. Do you see how that's a totally different way to play a game?
There you go.
And now what
You're
are you
looking at
doing?
the
So
computer.
now you're poking around. What? Now you're seeing how much of it they do, right?
Yeah.
Like, just how much can I poke at? That's a game designer way to play a
Look at
video
the
game.
plants. Oh damn.
Right, because you have specific questions in mind, and you're like, I wonder how much they actually do in the stream. Like, how much exploration is there really? How much do they do? And what's the sort of experience of that? Whereas as a player, you would just poke at it because you're like, maybe you're curious, or ignore it because you don't care.
Oh.
okay, here's the expansion of exploration. Now they're letting you go to new places, but they imply that you're going to be able to go to new places, right? But then they stop you. But the fact that you're stopped by dialogue suggests very clearly, like, okay, you're going to be able to go there like soon or at some point.
Yeah. I think you can. I don't know though. So there's definitely something here. I don't know what it would be. I guess it would the experience would be mystery. You have no idea where you are, why that happened.
Sudden change in appearance as well.
Yeah, you are different. You're blue now. I don't know why it's like that.
It's like they're wearing armor, actually, to be honest.
Because you are.
Okay, yeah.
No.
I don't know. I guess there's not a whole lot to do other than save your game. I guess having nothing else in the room but the save point will, because you're not always going to interact with those papers on the wall, for example. But I think you'd kind of have to be, you in order to ignore that, you'd probably have to have background knowledge and want to ignore it. I don't think anyone who's never played
Yeah,
this game would.
this is one of those things where you don't really want a difficult player decision, right? You want the player to interact with the save point, and if you give them a bunch of other stuff, that could get lost, and now they don't learn about the save points. And that's the problem.
Yeah,
I like
because
how
what if
they
there's
also made the save point a shiny star.
Now you've
I like how they
learned it.
gave it because it's like a shiny star, so people will go up to it and click on it.
It's also in the level. It's also like in this area that's kind of like
Open.
they have this box area that just sort of signifies
why
this
like
is
that?
almost like a room. It just makes it clearly it's just clearly the visual focal point, right? So you click
Like
on
I
it,
don't
and
even
open.
think
It's simple.
I don't even think they expect anyone to actually put the game down here to save and put the game down. This room is just introducing the save point, and
It's
that's
really
it.
just to teach you that, and it's an important enough thing to teach that they just do it by itself real quick.
Right.
Oh, now there's sound.
Discord doesn't pick up all the sound. I am getting audio, but like some of the music, if it's quiet, gets cut off.
Like those are trigger points. There's a thing here that's invisible that when I walk towards it, those start to move, which is cool.
And they're probably
Right.
visually introducing some things, and also there's between that and the like windingness of the path, a lot of that just helps it keep from feeling too like tedious. If it was like one straight path, it's just a little bit.
'Cause, yeah, there really is no gameplay. It's all set building and tone building. I mean, there was
Yeah,
a little
so they're just
shadow that
making
walked
sure
away. You know something's coming, but you don't know what it's gonna be.
So there's a gameplay introduction. They're teaching you the slide.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, spoilers, but everything pretty much comes up later.
A lot of this is that they're just establishing the visual language for the game, right? They're just establishing
Yeah.
what different things mean. They're just creating associations between visuals and.
Ooh.
Okay, now they're establishing gameplay. Remember
Yeah,
when we talked about layering
Yeah, man.
concepts? They established the wiggling guys, then they changed it by having the red outline, and then they shot a little thing at you, and the heart shows up. Like they're showing, okay, these things like do something when you walk by them, but you don't know what it is. Then the something is, oh, they shoot at you. So they layered the concepts just to make it very clear and intuitive.
right. Yeah. You know it's gonna happen because the other things happened, but
You expect them to
you
do
know.
something, so when they do something, it's not a shock at all, but you learn what the
Right.
thing is.
Now you have to do a puzzle here. Oh. That was not that difficult, actually.
No, and that's the same thing. Like they'll probably do similar puzzles to that in the future, but much more complex. They'll layer elements onto it to make it more complex. And that's this way you're introduced to the way puzzles work before they give you the really hard puzzles.
Yeah.
You'll note that in gameplay, especially in tutorialization and onboarding, there is very much the same principle as in storytelling, where there's setup and payoff that has to happen. Wow, it's a good thing they already introduced this mechanic, huh?
Yeah.
Yep.
And having Susie dodge it in a cutscene was, I guess, also helpful to show that they're not
They
good.
reinforced it. Setup, reinforcement,
Yeah.
payoff.
Mm-hmm.
It's also nice in case the player just like got hit by everything in the last thing to make sure like it's clear. Now they're
There's the
introducing it
slide
on a different
mechanic.
plane. Yeah, they're combining the slide mechanic with the dodge mechanic now.
I don't know how I did get hit by that one.
Yeah, I was like, how did
on
you
the
not?
inside of it?
There's a reason for that. So my suspicion is that so you want to be thinking a lot about hitboxes quite often.
Yeah.
My suspicion here is that they just made the hitboxes, because remember, we've talked a lot about the importance of visual communication. So an easy mistake to make is to go, oh, so we need hitboxes that perfectly align with the object. No. Quite often, you want hitboxes that are slightly smaller than the object, because because players will generally infer the situation to their personal benefit. So they'll think, oh, I barely dodged that, and it makes you feel more skilled more often than not. Platformers do the same thing, where there's like hitbox slightly after the end of a platform, so that if you jump slightly late, it's still fine.
Yeah.
That's
You'll
very
notice
common.
that's why older Mario games are so hard compared to like New Super Mario Bros. Because they didn't have that. A New Super Mario Bros. Game has that.
But that's just an example of I suspect that's an example of hitboxes at play. Maybe that's slightly off, but it's nice. It's nice to have those things be to just in general. If you have a big visual for the projectile attack, but the hitbox is smaller than it, then what you're doing is you're making it feel harder than it actually is, which is great. Because with difficulty, the most important thing, just like with anything else, is how it feels. If it feels difficult, good. We did it. Making it actually hard is irrelevant.
Right.
In fact, often making it actually hard is way worse than making it kind of easy but feel really hard. Because it feels really difficult, but it's actually kind of easy. Then the experience of most people is that they overcame this seemingly very difficult challenge, which is actually exactly what we want most often. All right, we kind of use the distinction between the reality of the thing and the experience of the thing to our advantage.
Yeah, we want hype moments in Aura. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, we want people to feel cool. We want people to feel like they're accomplishing things and overcoming challenges, not necessarily accomplishing things and overcoming challenges. At least not always. Sometimes. Fine.
Good to move on?
Yeah, sure. The dialogue options seem pretty intentional also.
So this is the bat story.
Yeah. Also, something I noticed is the music is kind of timed. I think when the text appears. They kind of plan that out. Are you progressing the text yourself?
No.
Yeah, I thought so. I forgot how it works.
You could still do that. You could just make it so that there's a way to make music loop and then swap on button press. It's not really technical.
Yeah,
You could do it
yeah.
either way.
I get to play I get to watch a DeltaRune playthrough for class. This is the best
Well,
best
not
class
much of
ever
one.
made. No, yeah, I'm kidding.
Oh, now we're in actual combat.
Yeah. Oh yeah. See, it's they kind of introduced the heart as you, and you want to avoid the heart touching bad things in the slide and little twitchy ball segment. That sounds weird to say, but that's what they did.
Yeah,
They
it's just now
introduced,
constrained in a tiny little space. That's the only difference, really.
Yeah. That was also the main gimmick for Undertale as well. So
Yeah.
if you played that, you know. But
Yeah, but the
it's
nice
good
thing
they
is now it's
introduced
been
it.
introduced for people who don't know. Like,
Yeah.
they're accounting for that experience. It's very possible that they expect the more robust experience to be those who have played before. Like, of course, it's a sequel, so fine. If you've played Undertale, you get a little bit more out of this. But they're not leaving anybody behind, where they're making sure everything's introduced, and they're introducing things in these nice ways that are layered with narrative, so that if you already know all this stuff, it's not like you're getting nothing. You're still getting things that you can wrap your head around and think about and pay attention to and focus on, so that it's not nothing. Both experiences are being accounted for. Like, what does it feel like to
Right.
play this game as someone who's played Undertale? What does it feel like to be someone who hasn't played Undertale before? And also, in a sequel, quite often in a sequel, you get the added benefit of being able to say, we're going to, when we have to choose between like what to prioritize, and you will often, you get to say, we're going to prioritize the experience for people who have played Undertale because it's a sequel. We expect most people will have played Undertale.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a good stopping point, though, after that combat. We could talk about the combat system, but that's the whole systems design is its own, it's another can of worms.
Yeah, find a save. You wouldn't want to lose this.
Yeah, find the save point.
And by the way, if we went back and played that again, we'd definitely get different stuff out of it. We could focus on something else, and we could think about it from a different perspective, and we could get very different information from the gameplay, just from the game design analysis. We get more stuff, different stuff.
Right.
There we go.
All right.
There we go. We're done.
Okay.
All right. That's pretty much it. I was going to wrap it up for History of Games Week 1. That's pretty much what we're going to be doing in this class. We're going to just be like focusing on gameplay analysis and figuring out what makes sense. That exercise with exploration was really valuable. We'll do more things like that where we're really thinking about how to break these things down in again, everything needs to be actionable and practical. Like if you're not coming away with your analysis with an understanding of like, oh, this is actually what steps I would take as a game designer, you're probably doing analysis wrong. Like that's sort of the point. So it's probably not working. Anyway, that's we'll wrap it up. We're like 10 minutes early, but we can wrap it up there. We'll be doing very much the same thing next week.
We have you for
Game mechanics.
Yes, at 2.
Yeah. Yep. So hopefully you've done your D&D combat encounter. How'd that go? Did you guys do that?
No.
That sounds
We
like
did
I don't
not
think
do
so.
that yet, no.
Well, you've got an hour. I would do it.
I'd say, yeah, we should do it right now.
Yeah, I would do it. This is
How would we even do a D&D counter?
I think we
Great
just make
question.
a scenario.
Yeah, how would you do that?
You could probably find. I don't know. I guess
What do you
that
need?
wouldn't work. I was thinking
What do
you need a
to
dungeon
run?
master. You need
Okay.
a enemy, a dungeon master, character sheet. I don't know if you really need a setting.
You have character
I guess
sheets.
that's it. We do have the character sheets. We need an enemy and a dungeon master, I think.
Part of the point of this assignment was to go through the process of like figuring out what you need and then getting what you need. There would be setup involved. There's going to be learning involved. Probably have to read some stuff because you have to understand the rules. It's a bit of a process. Yeah. You asked the question, how would we do that? That is precisely the question I was hoping you would answer. It's a great question. The only problem is that you asked it with almost a rhetorical question. Instead of making it a rhetorical question, just actually ask yourself the question and then try to answer the question. If you had done that, you probably would have just been able to figure this out because there's a bunch of resources online you could find. You would probably find very quickly that you need, if we're going to use a map, we would need enemies and we need like level appropriate enemies. How do we get level appropriate enemies? taking the time, sitting down and setting up an encounter would have taught you those things because you would have run into these problems. But then just each problem, go solve it. Instead of getting... This is the thing, is you don't want to run into the first problem and go, well, there's problems. I guess we can't do this. You run into the first problem and you go, there's a solution to this somewhere. We got to figure that out because otherwise we're stuck and we got to get to the end. So it's a little bit hard now, but give it your best shot. You have an hour. And also, game mechanics was going to work. We were going to work on tweaking, changing mechanics and trying to figure out what the implication or the ramification of mechanical changes would be.
And we're still using the 0.5 system, right? For
5th edition, same characters, same system.
5th edition? Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
Good luck.
I wonder if you could do for I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm wondering if you could do a D&D encounter online, and could a computer be a dungeon master? I don't know. At that point,
Not
just play an
really.
RPG game.
Yeah,
No.
not really. There are people that are trying to get like ChatGPT to be able to do it, and it's getting better, but it's really.
Yeah, I've heard that. I don't want to use ChatGPT though. That sounds like it'd have more setup than it's worth.
Nah, it's not that great.
Okay.
We'll figure it out, and figure it out as a group. This is essentially a group project. You got to figure this out. See how you can do this efficiently. Yeah, good luck.
Okay.
See
you at 2 then. Yeah.